Like a lot of people, I was pretty horrified. Well, I think people want to make sure that this is a campaign that's ready to go and win, that the president and his team are being candid with us about his condition, that this was a real anomaly and not just the way he is these days.
Coming home to Texas this weekend, I would say that the input from my constituents has been 10-1 in favor of replacing President Biden on the ticket.
I say, Mr. President, your legacy is set. We owe you the greatest debt of gratitude. The only thing that you can do now to cement that for all time and prevent utter catastrophe is to step down and let someone else do this.
Reactions from Democrats to the president's debate performance and our interview on Friday night. One of the things we're going to talk about here on the Roundtable, joined by former DNC chair Donna Brazile, former Trump Justice Department spokesperson, Dispatch senior editor Sarah Isgur, USA Today Washington bureau chief Susan Page, and Washington Post congressional reporter Marianna Sotomayor. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Let me begin with you, Donna. Just set the table here. Where do you think things stand inside the Democratic Party for President Biden right now?
Well, George, this is a critical time for the country. It's a very challenging time for the Democratic Party. Perhaps a sad and difficult moment for the Biden family. We know the stakes are very high. We know what's on the line. Keeping control of the United States Senate, taking back the United States House. But at the same time, we also have to reassure, and the president is going to have to do it, as well as those of us in the party, reassure the country, but more importantly, the delegates. In 2 weeks, I'm on the Credentials Committee. I know many of you think I'm past my prime, but let me just tell you, I got more to do. But the Credentials Committee will have to send ballots to all 4,000 plus delegates. Automatic delegates, of which I am one, we're no longer super. We lost that ability to vote on the first ballot. Those delegates who have, by and large, been supportive of the president, they are pledged to the president, they will submit their ballots, hopefully within 1 week, and we will probably ascertain better than any pollster, better than any pundit, better than any strategist, just where the president stands with his own delegates. Because once the delegates nominate him, then the president will have to go to the convention and either release those delegates by making an announcement, or the Democratic Party will have to decide the day after the convention, where do we go from here?
So that means the clock is ticking. Susan Page, coming out of the debate and then the interview on Friday night, it appears that the general consensus is that President Biden did not do as badly as in the debate, but may not have done enough to reassure at least all Democrats.
Yeah, for some Democrats, this was the worst of all worlds, because he was better than he was in the debate. On the other hand, how could he not be? And on the other hand, he wasn't as compelling and crisp and clear as he would need to be to settle the issue of his questions about his mental acuity. And he refused to agree to independent medical tests to determine whether there's some medical condition going on here that Americans would have a right to know about if they were going to re-elect him as president. So this is more of a holding action than determining, I think, which course is ahead.
Many would argue that former President Trump should have to submit to that same
Absolutely.
kind of testing. Sarah Isgur, the former president has been uncharacteristically quiet over the last several days.
Oh, I don't know. On social media, he's been pretty loud in his normal bombastic self. I just think this has overwhelmed a lot of that coverage. He's not on Twitter anymore. He's not doing the sort of public events, in interviews that might step on the Democratic message. But, obviously, when you see your opponent struggling like this, the correct political strategy is to let it happen and get out of the way.
Marianna, probably the most critical audience right now are Democrats in the House and Democrats in the Senate. Let's walk through what's going to be happening over the next several hours. We've seen a handful of House Democrats, still a small minority, come out and say that the president should step aside. But there's going to be a key meeting today on Zoom held by Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader in the House.
Yeah, he is going to be speaking to the ranking members on committees to be able to talk through what these members are hearing, how they're feeling. It's also a type of meeting that happens weekly on Wednesdays, but they've moved it up because they know how unpredictable this week is going to be. It's the first week that both senators and members of the House will be together since the debate, since the fallout, since they have heard from the campaign and the White House, many Democrats are so angry and have lost trust to the point where many have told me it's completely irreparable because the White House and the campaign, you know, we're just spinning them. We're saying, no, Biden's going to be fine. It was just a bad night. Everyone on Capitol Hill saw what many Americans saw. They're hearing it from constituents. And I have to say, it really is, as many Democrats have pointed out to me, a very painful moment for them. It's a somber moment. They know that they're going to go into these meetings behind closed doors with members. It's going to be very emotional. And there are a number of House Democrats and senators who are still behind Biden, who are in those group texts saying, no, we need to stick with the president. But almost everyone that I have spoken to, especially on the House side, say, you know, at some point this week, the collective already is that many Democrats want Biden to step aside. And the interview on Friday when he said, you know, it was through the we've only heard concerns through the press. That has only emboldened Democrats to more than likely go public this week.
I want to broaden the conversation out, but before we move on, let's talk about the Senate as well, because you saw I asked President Biden about this move by Senator Mark Warner to organize Senate Democrats, some kind of a letter by Senate Democrats. Where does that stand right now? Yeah,
you know, a lot of senators were willing to hear out Senator Warner, but they were waiting to see how Biden performed on Friday. And really, the movement of this letter, or it was going to either be a letter or to go to the White House at some point this week. I mean, those conversations are still ongoing. I think there is something to say, too, about the Senate. Biden, former senator, the White House has done so much to try and keep that coalition together. The fact that we are seeing fractures there is more surprising.
Donna, the one question that President Biden would not answer in that 22-minute interview is what he would do if Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi and the Senate Democratic leader came down, Chuck Schumer came down to the White House and said, we're going to lose the House and the Senate if you don't go. He would not answer that question. Where do you think things stand inside of the House and the Senate right now?
I agree. There's a lot of frustration. Look, I like to pick up the phone and call members. I like to talk to them. I've been talking to as many as possible, along with state party chairs and delegation leaders, to say, the delegates are in charge of this process. I recognize members of Congress, they have a lot of power, they can speak to the media, but the delegates are in charge of this process. Democrats are not going to overturn the will of the people, but if delegates get this sense that we're going to lose it all, that becomes a problem for the president. The president still has time. I mentioned 2 weeks from now.
How much time? How much time does he really
have?
Well,
look,
really
I mean, 121 days, George. Can I put back the campaign in 121 days? Hell yeah, but it will not be the campaign you saw before that debate, and it will not be the campaign that I've seen after the debate. Stop. You know what one of my neighbors told me, and I live in a pretty liberal area. Don't move in my neighborhood, Sarah. One of my neighbors said, don't gaslight us. I mean, people are furious. They're angry, but they're angry on both sides. I've also heard people who are in the foxhole who are saying, why are you doing this to my president? Not me personally, but why are you guys questioning him? What about the other guy? You're comparing him to the almighty, not the alternative. And that's what we're hearing from Democrats. There's a lot of anger, a lot of emotion, but at the end of the day, I want to calm the waters. I want to say there's a process, and this process starts with the fact that Joe Biden secured the nomination by getting the votes for the delegates. That's the process. I may sound like I'm talking about numbers, but I'm talking about how Democrats will have to move in the coming days.
Susan Page, one of the things we're seeing here, and it's in pretty stark relief, is the differences between the modern Democratic Party and the modern Republican Party. Donald Trump convicted of a felony, indicted for trying to overturn an election, lying about the last election, yet they close ranks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question about who's going to be the Republican nominee. A big question about who's going to be the Democratic nominee. But you're not going to change the Democratic nominee unless Joe Biden agrees to do it. You're not going to be able to convince delegates, almost all of whom are committed to him, although not legally committed, but pledged to him, and who were chosen because they were Biden loyalists, that they're going to move away from Biden unless he says to them, I've decided it's the right thing to do to step down. And here's the way we move forward to have a chance to win in November. And that's why the opening he left with a congressional delegation coming to him was so important, because he didn't say he wouldn't listen to them. He said they won't do that. So let's see this week, because time is running out. Let's see this week if they do that.
Donald Trump wants to run against Joe Biden.
I think that's right at this point. And, you know, you mentioned the difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. I think compared to the Republican Party in 2016, particularly after the Access Hollywood tape, there was a lot of conversation among Republicans about replacing Donald Trump all the way to the highest levels of the RNC. Of course, it was after the convention at that point. Ask yourself whether Democrats would be having the same conversation today if Joe Biden were leading Donald Trump. It's the reason why Republicans aren't talking about replacing Donald Trump. He looks like he's going to win handily at this point. From an electoral college standpoint, could be one of the largest victories we've seen in a long time. So yes, they want to run against Joe Biden at this moment, but they see Harris as vulnerable as well. It's a win-win right now for Republicans.
Donna, it's all hypothetical, but let's talk about the possibilities if President Biden does indeed decide to step aside. Foregone conclusion that Kamala Harris gets the nomination?
It would be very difficult to replace somebody who's been vetted, who knows the job, has done a tremendous, I think she's done a tremendous job. And to ask the delegates elected to the convention, who are Biden-Harris supporters, to bypass Kamala Harris because some Republicans and a few others may not like her, it would be political malpractice. As I tell everyone, Kamala Harris has earned the right to be considered if. I mean, we got a lot of what-if scenarios. But she's strong. She's down in Louisiana. She had a rally last night with 60,000 people. I've heard from so many folks, including my family. They say she's fired up and ready to go, and they're not going to replace her.
Susan Page, you've got some Democrats like Jim Zogby, James Carville calling for a slightly different process, maybe a series of town meetings, maybe a series of debates leading into the convention. Is that realistic?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, I think that ship has sailed. We don't have much time. The Democrats don't have much time, even before their convention, before their virtual roll call that we expect them to have by August 7th. So I think if President Biden decides to step back, the likely scenario, not guaranteed, the likely scenario is he endorses Kamala Harris. The debate becomes who's her running mate. And the hope is...
I should add one other possibility there. And I'm not saying this is going to happen, but at least it's another possibility. Some would argue that the best thing for the president would do if he's reaching that decision is to actually resign the office so that Kamala Harris can run as an incumbent.
Hard enough to get Joe Biden to agree not to run for a second term, to make him limit his first term, which has been, by many accounts, incredibly successful and consequential. I think that is a bridge too far. I think that's unlikely.
Marianna, one of the things we've also seen this week, you talk about the situation in the House and the Senate. That seemed to be somewhat different from at least some of the message the president got when the governors came down to the White House. I think it was on Wednesday night. And some were speculating the reason for that is perhaps that a lot of these governors were looking ahead to 2028, and they know that if he got out now, they would likely be foreclosed from that if Kamala Harris were indeed the nominee this time around.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Many Democrats are considering, when discussing this, the next couple of years. Something that I hear from Capitol Hill is he likely could affect these down ballot candidates. But let's think about the midterms. That is where a lot of House Democrats in particular are extremely worried. Because yes, let's say if Biden were to win, how is he going to be as president in the next couple of years? What if he does diminish more? And especially right before the midterms, that could really hurt the chances of, let's say, House Democrats. If they win back the majority, they could lose it again in a couple of years. There's a lot of those conversations and what ifs.
And Sarah, to flip the question around, there's a pretty significant difference between if Donald Trump wins, between Donald Trump winning and carrying the House and the Senate with him, and Donald Trump winning and either losing the House and or the Senate.
Well, the last several presidencies, of course, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden have all carried the House and Senate with them heading into their terms. So they've had those first 2 years to really pursue a legislative agenda, to appoint judges, for instance, with the Senate. It would be a huge difference for Democrats to have a Donald Trump pinned in by Democratic House or Senate, frankly, and one in which Donald Trump sweeps all of those. But again, the map is looking dire for Democrats across the board, at the Senate level, at the House level, and of course in the swing states that Joe Biden won in 2020.
We only have 30 seconds left. I'm going to go around the table and put you all on the spot. Joe Biden going to be a Democratic nominee?
Status quo wins in D.C., yes.
To be determined this week on Capitol Hill.
You got me.
He's the nominee of the Democratic Party and leader of the free world.